And we're back, and now we're bringing you more reactions from the private sector. And this time we have Mr. Richard Rambarran, who's representing the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and who's also an economist. Of course, the budget was just presented, so of course we wouldn't be able to get into a sort of rigorous economic analysis of the budget. But Mr. Rambarran, your initial thoughts?
So overall, I want to say thank you, firstly, for interviewing me. But I want to say that it is very impressive that the government is able to craft a budget that is the largest in the history of Guyana, keep the fiscal deficit at about 7%, and also be able to charter the investment path of the country. It is very important for us, and we cannot understate it, that the capital investment program, the PSIP as it's known, has grown almost 100% to about $220 billion. This by itself is able to catalyze economic growth through infrastructure spending. So I want to say that we cannot underestimate this, and it's extraordinarily important within the context of a developing country.
Mr. Rambarran, you mentioned debt. For the average viewer, what does that mean? And based on what was presented in the budget, what can we look forward to as it relates to that?
So part of what has happened in this budget is, of course, the government has withdrawn money from the Natural Resources Fund. And where the government has channeled the money is important, because you see a lot of investment in skills, you see a lot of investment in human capital development, education for persons, and you see a lot of investment in infrastructure. All of those are investments that will guide Guyana in its development trajectory, and they are also investments that are investments in the future. But what is also important is that the debt is still at a stable as well as a sustainable point where the future generations are not burdened. So overall, given the architecture that we have in Guyana, I think it's very important that the government has been able to craft this budget in a manner that it's being done in a fiscally responsible way, so as to not pressure the future generations.
Right. In terms of the budgetary measures that we've heard of, any of those particularly jumped out of you?
I think the measure of the reduction of excise tax from 20% to 10% on fuel, that one in particular is one that is very important, because if one understands the nature of fuel and fuel consumption and how it helps to spur economic activity, it is essentially used in all sectors. Now, what is happening globally in terms of price rises, what is happening globally in terms of the supply chain, this type of excise tax reduction will certainly be able to spur economic activity and have what is known as a multiply effect. It's able to affect or impact different sectors in a multitude of ways.
Right, you speak about spurring economic activity, but what has been quite topical is the rising cost of living. How do these measures, and perhaps how does the budget help that?
Yeah, so what you'll find is that Dr. Singh, in presenting, would have he went on ad nauseum about measures to put disposable income back into the hands of the population. And if one examines it, you'll see that there are a multitude of measures which really put money back into the hands of the population, whether it's increasing the amount of money that goes into the hands of parents from about 19,000 when one considers both of the grants to about 30,000 when one looks at the increase in the income tax threshold, the impact that will have over the medium term, compounded by salary increases, compounded by the investments in all of the sectors. Really, what you're looking at is a multifaceted budget that is able to impact a number of sectors in ways that, of course, within the short time, we can't fully elucidate.
Right. Just to put on your economist cap for a quick second in my final question, of course, it's still just a few moments ago we heard the budget, but at this point in time, do you have any comments on any shortcomings you might have noticed in the budget?
Not in particular, because I haven't examined it in intimate detail, but I want to just reiterate the point that I think it is impressive that we are seeing a fiscally responsible approach. You know, one would have the tendency to think that when there is money coming in from the petroleum sector, an economy is growing, tax revenues are increasing, it's very easy to have expenditures outstripping income, so that you end up with a large deficit. That is a very poignant point, and it's one that stands out to me. But in terms of drawbacks, I have not examined it in the level of detail to be able to critically comment. But overall, I like what I'm seeing, both from the private sector perspective as well as with an economist cap on.